So as Patty said, I've got a presentation that's about 26 slides long that focuses on the photographing of the evictions during the evictions. Then I have another 10 for those who wish to stay around of the homes after they were, after the evictions of destroyed homes, and and how that thing played out in the plan of campaign. So I'm delighted to be invited to speak before you. I know Patty and Paul and others have asked me in years past to come, but I live in Sammamish, Washington, and so distance to Kilrush is a challenge. So having a Zoom presentation just works, it works fine for me, and I'm happy to do it. So you can see on the cover page there that there's a number of bullets that have organized or driven my research over the last six or 7 years. And right at the very bottom, it says that, what inspired the research was the fact that I discovered that my great-grandfather was an Irish American witness. The family only knew in family inherited lore that my great-grandparents were at an Irish eviction. We didn't know which one. And while researching my great-grandfather several years ago, just to learn about his Fenian past, a Canadian historian, Irish-born, pointed me to an online publication in 1889 that was one of my great-grandfather's accounts of his witness to the Vandeleur Estate evictions. That's how we discovered this. And from that, I've been studying this thing off and on for some years. I also discovered 4 photographs that he brought home. Again, we had an inherited story that my great-grandfather brought home photographs, but they've been lost. And so they were only recovered by finding them in a publication, a 1901 publication online. And there was 4 of them. So that's what put me on to the study of the Vandeleur Estate evictions.
I think everyone is still just seeing your document recovery page with the spreadsheet. We're not seeing your PowerPoint yet.
Uh-oh. You're not seeing it?
No, are you sharing the wrong window or anything?
No, I see it. All right, let me do something here. I'm going to end the show, and no one's seeing it yet, right?
I'm not seeing it. I'm still seeing the document recovery. I'm seeing an Excel window, not a PowerPoint window.
How about that?
Still seeing the Excel window.
Oh, I'm going to have to call in my expert. Hey, Viv. Okay, no one is seeing my my PowerPoint.
Are you co-host?
I am a co-host, right? Not seeing it still?
No. If you click on share screen, it will allow you to pick whether to share your whole screen or just a particular.
It says here my screen sharing has been paused.
Okay, click it.
How about that?
Now we're seeing PowerPoint. I'm seeing PowerPoint. Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. Let me get into the.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I have to get rid of some of this stuff. It's down here now, Viv.
That's okay.
It's my IT expert here helping me out. Okay, how's that?
Yeah, we're now on the slideshow.
Okay.
No, they're not seeing it.
You are seeing it. My wife's here. You are seeing it, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
good. Okay,
right. Yeah, I presume everyone else is.
Here we go. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't
all good now.
I don't know what happened. So the bullet points are there, and those are the drivers of my research I was talking about. Starting with the fact that my great-grandfather was, an American witness to these evictions. And in his accounts, the very first bullet there, in his accounts, he identified a T. O'Connor of Limerick as the photographer, in his words, taking photographs of all of the eviction scenes. That started me on this study of the Vandeleur Estate evictions. Now, over the course of time, I have verified that my grandfather's statement that Timothy O'Connor of Limerick was there. I have verified that, and I have searched for and found many of O'Connor's photographs. Now, we can think of them as different than the Lawrence photographs, those in the Lawrence collection, but there is some bleed over, some overlap that we will talk about. So I went looking for the O'Connor photographs, and I've been finding them. As I find them, and you look at this cover page right here, that's the McGrath family eviction. As I find them, I've been learning the stories. I've been collecting the stories that O'Connor wanted us to know. And I couldn't help it, but as you collect, an inventory of photographs, and then you start to see how they were used, well, that drives another line of research. And I will talk some about that tonight as well. I've only been able to disseminate my research. I'm here in Sammamish, Washington. And so I have been writing for the other Claire, and I see John O'Brien has logged in, and he's in the audience tonight. The other Claire has published 4 of my stories, and they can be found at the Clare County website, library website. I've also participated in blogs, and I've had some virtual interviews with various Irish news agencies. So there's been some of this stuff floating around. But I'm really interested in broadening my dissemination. Tonight is an opportunity. This is being recorded, so it'll be archived, and others will be able to get to it at some future point. And I'd like to broaden the discussion. I want to say up front, this is a reflection. These are my reflections of a study I've conducted. They're not endorsed by any other activity, just personal thoughts. But as we drive towards the future, because these photographs, the O'Connor photographs, are so scattered, that I would like to see some effort made to centralize or consolidate, even if they're copies of something that isn't a private collection, just to make the understanding and the study of this stuff easier. We got to set the stage for the evictions. We know they were in July 1888. The late Victorian era, some have characterized that time frame as the second land war years. The National League had rolled out the plan of campaign in October 1886. And of course, central to that, to the plan of campaign, was this notion of solidarity, negotiating as a block with the landlord. And it was starting to work. This plan of campaign was starting to work as it ran across the estates in Ireland, but there were recalcitrants. There were holdout landlords. And one of those was, of course, a Captain Vandeleur, an absentee landlord. He just really was not interested in achieving a negotiated settlement with his tenants. So when negotiations finally broke down, everybody prepared for the inevitable, which was the evictions. Now, the plan of campaign, the manifesto, as some call it, was published in United Ireland, and I have cut out a little paragraph from it. In addition to the notion of solidarity and a combination, the National League wanted to ensure that the evictions were publicized. And we can read it right there. Fullest publicity should be given to the evictions. Every effort made to enlist public sympathy. Well, how did they do that in 1888? Well, the press corps was there in force. Now, whether they were invited or they were just sent there by their editors, they were there in force from Dublin, London, all over Ireland. And they assembled in the temporary lodgings in Kilkee. It was convenient to do so. There were also, that I can find, 2 photographers who were present. T. O'Connor, the man I've been interested in, and probably Peter Collins, who shows up at the end on the 7th and 8th day of the evictions. I mentioned 3 of the clergy. These are the most important participants. The Vicar General, Michael, Patty Dinan, and Dinan. I'm sorry, Dinan. And then there's Thomas O'Meara, and there's Lawrence Gilligan. Now, I pick on them because they're going to show up in photographs, and they were always being mentioned in the press reports. There were politicians as well. There were David Sheehy and Jeremiah Jordan on the nationalist side, and there was also a fellow named T.W. Russell, who was on the royalist side. So that's this little snippet right here. Now over to the right is an article that comes from the Cork Herald on July 17th. That's important because it's published the day before the evictions. The evictions begin on the 18th. This was already published the day before. And there the correspondent, I'm going to have to move this gallery over. There the correspondent says, he talks about the preparations the tenants have made. And inside this red box, the houses of the tenants are all strongly barricaded. And the occupants have resolved to keep the invader out as long as possible. Then we slip down to mid-paragraph. Owing to a legal formality, more than one half of the intended families cannot be, one of the intended evictions cannot be carried out at present. And the operations of the crowbar and battering ram will be confined to the Kilrush district. I think that means Petticourt district, but the Kilrush district, in which 46 families have been identified as liable for eviction. The barricaded homes were visited by a large number of excursionists. We don't know who they are, but folks who are sympathetic to the cause, among whom was Mr. T. O'Connor of Limerick, who took photographic views of the exterior and interior of the barricaded homes. So this is important to me because it's the first time I find Timothy O'Connor on location, on site, and not only is he taking photographs during the evictions, he took them before, and I've not found any of those, but he took photographs in and out of the preparations made by the tenants, and I find that very interesting. This is a very busy table, and I've added to it over the years. In my first publication, it was quite simple. Now it's quite complex. This is the eviction sequence, day 1 through 8, beginning on the 18th of July, running through the 31st. But then there's weekends in between, those 2 weekends there, and there was 2 days in yellow. And in those 4 days, 6 days, 2 weekends and the 2 yellow days, no evictions took place. So even though this was more than a 2-week period, the operational days were 8. Here's the sequence of eviction. 25 of the 46 families that were liable to be evicted were selected. Here's the tenant's name all the way down. The level of resistance. Let's talk about that. So the level of resistance ranged from no resistance, and in the first case, when the eviction party got to Patrick's house there, his wife and family were there. He was not. There was no resistance offered. And that happened in a few cases. But mostly it was minimal to moderate. Minimal meaning that the family had defended their home by stuffing brush in the windows of the doorway. They were inside their home. They didn't come out right away, and so the emergency man had to use farm tools as well as a crowbar or sledgehammer to clear away a doorway and get the family outside. That was minimal tools used. Moderate resistance, which was the case for most of these evictions, the ram was used. By moderate, I mean that the door was stoutly barricaded and a crowbar was not going to work, and so the ram was brought up and it smashed through the door. In 4 cases, it was a rigorous defense, and even after the battering ram breached the door or breached the wall, the family did not come out, but they stood their ground and they fought. And in those cases, there were 4. The home was thoroughly demolished. Michael Cleary, the Cleary family, day 1. Simon Connell on day 5. Matt, here's another name I trip over, McGraw on day 6. And on day 8, Thomas Birmingham. Those 4 homes were destroyed. The families stood their ground. The RIC had to run in. And in the case of adult males, they had a knockdown, drag out fight to bring that man out. Otherwise, they went inside and they hustled the family outside. And after the family was evicted, and after the emergency man removed all the family belongings, the sheriff gave the order to destroy the home. And those photographs are in a follow-on to this presentation, if you'd like to hear about that. I have been looking and finding photographs, and I've been matching them to the specific family eviction. This is my best guess. There are some, there's some ambiguity is right here. And I've been looking at the identifiers most times found on the photograph. O'Connor was very thorough. Not only did he give us a number, he gave us the name of the family, he gave us the estate, and he gave us a description of the action. And not only was he thorough, but his eviction numbering sequence, 368 all the way down to 369, faithfully follows the eviction sequence. So it's very helpful for a historian. We look at his photographs, and if you had this chart, you could match them very easily because you've got the name of the tenant here, and you've got the name of the tenant on the O'Connor photographs. But there are also Lawrence photographs. They're not ordered, they're not numbered in any kind of sequential process. It's very random. The descriptors on the photographs are not always helpful. They're very generic. And I think the reason for that is O'Connor was there taking the photographs. O'Connor had a small shop. He applied the notations on the photographs himself. He knew exactly who he was looking at. And so there's no ambiguity when you see his notations. The Lawrence photographs were annotated by back office staff in Dublin. There was a different motivation at work, as we shall see as we get into this presentation. So not only do the numbering system that Lawrence used, not only does it not follow the eviction sequences, the notes, the notations sometimes don't make sense. But nonetheless, there are 34 photographs that I can reasonably match to these evictions, and I've categorized them by O'Connor or Lawrence. And in some cases, as you look down and you see O'Connor dominating the first 4 days of the evictions, and then you see nothing on day 5. I don't know. I can't explain that. I have found no photographs. And then as you look down below that, you see Lawrence photographs dominate the inventory of photographs. Does that mean that Lawrence sent his photographer, Robert French, to Kilrush late in the eviction timeframe? I don't think so. I am of the opinion, it's my opinion, that Lawrence purchased O'Connor photographs because there are O'Connor photographs, intermingled among the Lawrence photographs, even at the very end. 34 photographs taken during the evictions, 8 taken later. A lot of photographs were taken. Now, I'm going to take you through photographs, O'Connor photographs primarily, following the sequence. But this photograph would be out of sequence because it says in the legend, this is dated to August 1888. The evictions were 18 July to 31 July. So this was taken sometime in August after the evictions. Now, this is a unique slide, one of a kind, and I can't tell you the story because it would take me 45 minutes just to talk about this photograph. So let's just first look at a number of people here. And that's why I put this slide here, because I want you to learn the identities of a number of these people because you're going to see them in the subsequent slides. The most important man in this photograph is this man right here. He's an unassuming gentleman. If you didn't have the legend down below, you might think he was a landlord. This man is an active duty colonel in the British Army. It's Colonel Albert Edward Turner. He is the man in charge of these evictions. He was appointed to be a divisional magistrate by the Undersecretary of Ireland. Now let's look at him because this is what he's going to wear throughout the evictions. He never gets in uniform. He's got corduroy pants. He's got leather leggings. He's got a jockey hat. He's got a white mustache, which is important to remember. And he carries this very thin stick right here. So you're going to see him throughout the photographs. I will point him out. The next man of importance is a RM. RM standing for either removable or resident magistrate. This man is Cecil Roach. He wears a yellow plaid jacket. He's got a blackthorn stick. He's got a derby. This is the charging magistrate. There are many magistrates in this photograph. Here's one. Here's one. RMs also. But this man was chosen above those senior to him to be the charging magistrate for these evictions. And the assumed reason is because he had a reputation for harsh judgments. An uncompromising man, no empathy. He will be, just like he is here, leaning up against a wall throughout the evictions, charging the tenants, the children, being brought out of their home and sending them off to the local jail. This is the land agent, Harlem Studdard. His father before him had been the land agent for Hector Vandeleur's father before him. This man here is the battalion surgeon. He's in mufti. He's in civilian attire here. And he looks this way in many photographs when he's on the evictions, but sometimes he wears a uniform. This man will be addressing the wounds of those who get badly beat up when they are defending their homes. This man down here is a member of the RIC. He's a DI. His name is Hill. DI stands for District Inspector. It's equivalent to a captain. This man is a man named Lockdale. He's an acting county inspector. He's the equivalent of a lieutenant colonel. These men are both in the RIC. This man's in uniform. This man is not here, but he will be during the evictions. The other man of interest is this captain down here. He's a cavalry officer, 3rd Hussars. He was the contingent commander of 60 mounted men. You see him in the photographs. He's not instrumental in the evictions, but you see him and you will recognize him because he's always close to the evictions and he is short. So I will point him out. He wears a bearskin cap when he's in his field attire. This man here is a 2nd lieutenant 1 year out of Sandhurst. He only shows up in 2 photographs. He's inconsequential, but there's a human interest story I will share with you later. Now, slipping down to the legend, August 1888, William Lawrence Studio, Dublin. Now, this is interesting. Did Lawrence send a photographer? Did he dispatch a photographer from Dublin studio to Kilrush after the evictions? It's very possible. This is not a photograph that would have been used by the National League. This is not a photograph taken, from the plan of campaign view of things. This is a photograph taken from the Crown's view of things. Now, the other thing, when you consider this date down here of August, and you look at the way the men are dressed, they're very casual, they're very relaxed. Half of the officials and officers are in civilian attire. Their shoes are polished. Even if they're in garrison uniform, their boots are polished. This is a slack period. It's after the evictions, and we know that the evicting party left on the 9th of August. So I'm going to make a guess that this photograph was taken on a weekend, a slack period, the 4th and the 5th of August, because newspaper accounts and my great-grandfather's statements talk about a number of these men getting into civilian attire and going into Kilkee on the weekend and partying, blowing off steam, making a nuisance of themselves. That would be more likely after the evictions were over, because then Kilkee had sort of thinned out too. The press pool was leaving and what have you. So I think this was taken on the 4th or 5th of August, but I can't be sure. It's my guess. But why do I pick on that date? I pick on that date because of what was happening in London that weekend. And what was happening was Timothy O'Connor had selected 5 of his eviction photographs, and he rushed them from wherever he developed them, either his studio down here at the bottom margin in Limerick, or from Kilkee, where fellow photographer Peter Collins had a studio. He gathered up 5 photographs and he rushed them to the Irish Exhibition in Kensington, a suburb of London. The Irish Exhibition had been open since the month of June. O'Connor had a display in Avenue C, at the head of Avenue C, a very prominent site to have your stall. And he rushed 5 photographs from a studio to his stall, and he placed them there, and they were seen probably as early as the 3rd of August, just 3 days after the evictions. And we know that because the Graphic published them on the 4th of August, which is a Saturday. The Graphic is a weekly publication, only publishes on Saturday. But the London dailies, as it says down here, had already commented about the photographs. So I'm assuming that O'Connor got them into his display, you know, the night of the 2nd, the morning of the 3rd of August, when the doors opened and the spectators from London came in. They saw these photographs. It's the first time that I can find where the London public has seen these photographs, and it caused quite a stir. Now I'm going to talk about these images. We see them down here in the legend. There's 4 of them. I have found photographs for all but this one. This one, I just haven't found it. 2 photographs were used to make a composite sketch that we see here, and these I'll talk about too. So we're going to go to the photographs that produced this sketch. Rock wall here, 5 RIC constables here. The Cleary home is slate roofed. There are 3 chimneys. This chimney is all the way against the edge of the roof line. The wall, there's a breach in the wall, and the rocks are falling. Now, the camera couldn't capture movement. This is artistic license to show action. The ram is being pulled back. There we see an emergency man pulling it back. We see a man leaning on his umbrella. We see the sub-sheriff, very distinctive man, very tall, very powerfully built, black socks, Sherlock Holmes hat. His hand is extended, his left hand is extended out, following the motion of the ram. Colonel Turner, white mustache, jockey hat, tweed jacket, leggings, thin cane. So hold that in your head, and here we go. This is one of the 4 photographs my great-grandfather brought back, and it was published in a 1901 publication called The Gale. This is the only time, this is how I discovered my great-grandfather's photographs, seeing them online. This is it's a very poor photograph because it's been reproduced so many times. But there's the man on the cane, there's the wall, there's the Clary house, there's the chimney, here are the 5 constables. Here's Colonel Turner, arm out. The emergency men are blurred because they're in action. They're pulling the ram back. Now, in this case, first stroke of the ram, this is O'Connor's words. The ram has not yet impacted the wall just to the left of the front door. Colonel Turner, in this case, has got his hand on his hip. This is the very first photograph that I have found of the evictions on the Vandeleur Estate. And the Clary house is number 3, day 1. My great-grandfather also had this photograph published in the Gale, but I found a better copy in a collection in Sheffield Library, London. Now, the wall now has been breached. We don't have 5 RIC, we have 25 RIC. We've got Colonel Turner standing as he was in the graphics illustration. There's his cane. Now, I always do this. It's great. I go at great risk when I try to, I can't see it. If I were to magnify this photograph, the RIC standing by the breach all have their batons in their right hands. The batons are normally sheathed right here behind their back, but they're getting ready to charge in through the house. Now, quite often due to evictions, there was an operational pause. The cameraman may have asked permission to take a photograph, and so they paused. What will happen next is these guys will charge through the breach. There are 4 children on the other side of that wall, the 4 Clary children, 2 boys and 2 girls. There won't be any bloodshedding because they're children, but the constables will drag them out, and Cecil Roach will charge them, let the girls go, and lock up the boys. So this is 369. So I assume that this is 368, although I can't be sure. But this is the way O'Connor, these are his notations. We've got the estate, we've got the action, we've got the family's name, and we got a number, 4 elements that you will see repeatedly. If you find a photograph of those elements, there's a good chance it's an O'Connor photograph. So I'm going to move to illustration number 4. I've made it larger here so we can talk about it. We don't have it. This is of the Pat Spellacy eviction, this family up here who will be evicted. The Clarys were evicted on day one. They were the third house evicted. They were the last eviction of the day. The eviction ended around 5 p.m. It was the first eviction where the ram was used. Everybody was shocked when that ram thudded into the door, thudded into the wall, and the wall disintegrated. Many of the civilian witnesses complained to the officials. They wanted to show their dismay, their disgust, their anger. And Colonel Turner was aware of this, and it made him concerned. So when day two dawned and the evicting party was moving to the Spelliscy family house, Colonel Turner reversed his standing orders of the day before and said, no civilian witnesses, no civilian observers will be allowed inside the sheriff's exclusionary line, the lines of steel, my great-grandfather called it. On this day, he would not let anybody but 3 people inside. Nobody else was allowed. The 3 people were all sympathetic to the crown, sympathetic to the landlord. They were the London Times reporter, one member of Parliament called T.W. Russell, and a member of the Irish Loyal and Patriotic Union. Everybody else was excluded. So that meant all the clergy, all the press correspondents, but the London Times reporter, all of the other civilian witnesses, including my great-grandparents, and the local population. On day two, the Clare Journal said 10,000 people witnessed these evictions. Now, O'Connor took this photograph, and I believe the photograph was truly once taken because the others were. He wanted the London public to understand that there were many people who saw this, and he was like the others. He was outraged with what had happened. He himself had been excluded. He takes this photograph from a distance. Now, when the sheriff opens up the lines and lets everybody flood in, the eviction is over. The family has been pulled out of their house. The emergency men have removed all their furnishings. And here is the picture that O'Connor chose to show. Now, there's a story here. This is one of the stories that I like learning about when I explore these photographs. Look how O'Connor framed this image. Here's the front door of the Spelliscy family, their house. Here is the family. We've got the father, Pat Spelliscy, his wife, 2 daughters. What do we see here? We see the possessions of the family thrown helter-skelter into the yard, and in some cases broken, because there was not the presence of the press, the clergy, the photographer when this family was evicted. There was no mitigating, there was nothing to mitigate the brutality of the eviction. And after the door was broken through by the ram, the emergency men went in and they just threw everything out. That's what we see here. Now, the photographer comes in with everybody else and sees this, and he wants to publicize these evictions, just like the tenant of the Plan a Campaign wanted people to do. He wanted to give publicity. So he asked the family to gather by their front door, as close to it as they could get, because the constables won't let them too close. And he photographs this. There's other people in the picture. We'll talk about those later. Now, the ram is not in this picture. So what we know here is that the eviction's over. The ram has been disassembled. The eviction party has stepped away, with the exception of 2 constables who've been posted to prevent the family from returning into their home. Because once you're evicted, the property then is in the possession of the sheriff, and he will place custodians into the house that were purchased by the landlord, rented by the landlord. By the way, this is an O'Connor photograph, telltale signs down here. This is a Sean Sexton photograph. I purchased a copy, but it's a low resolution copy. It says Pat Spelliscy and family after being evicted, Vandeleur Estate. And down at the bottom, it's got a number. It's hard to make out. It might be 372. This is day 2. Here is another O'Connor photograph that I found in a collection of O'Connor photographs in England. And there we've got the telltale indications that this is an O'Connor photograph. It's got in his own handwriting, it says eviction of Vandeleur Estate, Pat Spellacy House, ram after breaking door, and a number. Now, this is a Carta Vista photograph. It's mounted on a hardback. On the flip side, it's got T. O'Connor Studio, 20 George Street, Limerick. So there's no question about identity. Now, this young lady right here is this young lady right here. What's different in this photograph is the ram is still present. Everybody rushed in, and they were allowed to come in before the eviction party had sort of disengaged themselves. And so the ram is still up. We see the emergency. We see 3 of the emergency men. There were 10. We see 3 of them up close. My great-grandfather called these men blackguards from the north, cutthroats, broken down soldiers. The leader of the ram crew is this man. He's Sergeant Maddox, a broken down soldier. They were blackguards from the north because Colonel Turner said in his memoirs that no Clareman, no self-respecting Clareman would be, would accept being paid to be an emergency man. So they had to get him from the north. The constable that we see right here, he's a DI, he's an officer, he's probably DI Otter. He's about ready to post these 2 constables on either side of the door. So it's the same image taken before the one that was used in the graphics illustration. Now, the witnesses included Jeremiah Jordan and a member of Parliament. And Jeremiah Jordan, of course, was sympathetic to the tenants. He was sympathetic to the plan of campaign. So on the 30th of July, he brings this episode up in a House debate, and he challenges the Undersecretary, the Chief Secretary for Ireland, Lord Arthur Balfour, about what he saw. Balfour denies it. He says he has it on good authority, that it didn't happen that way at all. The furniture that was not already removed by the tenants was carefully and thoughtfully taken out and placed in an orderly manner out front. Of course, that wasn't true. Not only were there witnesses who said otherwise, there was O'Connor's photograph, the same one you saw. Freeman's Journal publishes this on the 1st of August. The debate happened on the 30th of July. So already we have O'Connor's photographs being used, at least by the Dublin press, to counter a statement made by the Chief Secretary for Ireland. So already O'Connor's photographs are being circulated, at least in Ireland. Now, the ILPU emissaries, Irish Loyal and Patriotic Union, who were allowed to come into the sheriff's exclusionary zone for the Spellacy family eviction, were these 2 right here. It was Arthur Patton, who's a member of the ILPU, and it was the member of Parliament from South Tyrone, T.W. Russell, sympathetic to the Crown. This illustration is probably propaganda, but here is Cecil Roach giving these guys the spin, the government spin, and they're taking notes about what they say happened on the Spellacy family eviction. The last illustration in that graphic collage was this one right here. It looks like rain imagery. It is clearly a martial-looking band of men. It was the eviction party. And this is O'Connor's words right here. Eviction of Vandeleur Estate, return of the eviction party to Kilrush House, number 376. Because we can see the number 376, we know it's from the end of day 3. The evictions were over, and now they're marching back along Francis Street back to the Kilrush House. Now, why was this photograph taken? What's the story here? I think the intent was to show the martial nature of the eviction force. The newspaper said it was an army of 500 men. Well, that's an exaggeration, but there were 300 men in uniform. There was 120 regular infantry, and this is some of them right there with fixed bayonets, white equipment webbing, means they're regular infantry. It was 60 mounted members of the 3rd Hussars. It was 120 RIC. You add it up, that's 300. And then there was various others. what you see here is the first contingent of infantry. Then it's followed by men on horseback. We see some umbrellas because of the rain. Men on horseback. Colonel Turner rode his horse every day to and from the evictions. O'Connor may have recognized Colonel Turner somewhere in here. We can't tell. It's everybody's in motion, so it's blurred. But he may have seen Colonel Turner, but clearly he wanted the London spectators at the Irish exhibition to see the martial nature. So we had fixed bayonets here. We have men on horseback. Further back would have been the rest of the RIC carrying rifles, the rest of the infantry, the hussars, and all the way at the end down here were the carriages and the jaunting carts carrying the evicting party, carrying the witnesses to the evictions, my grandparents included. I'm sure many of you will recognize Francis Street from this photograph. That was the end of those, the 5 photographs that were used to put on display at the Irish exhibition that were used for that illustration. Now this is 375. So this was, this was on day 3, and I'm going to spin through these pretty quickly. They're very common. Again, we know they're O'Connor photographs because it's the telltale 4 elements: Vandeleur Estate evictions, Pat Madigan, ram after bursting door. You may recognize this photograph, those of you who live around Kilrush, because it's used as a mural on Joe Whalen's Museum of Rural Life. Joe may be listening. He tells me that the photograph from which the mural was painted was in the family possession, of a descendant of the Madigans. That's where they got this photograph. Now, this particular one is in Sean Sexton's collection. What happened here is the ram bursted the door. The RIC went in and escorted the family out. The emergency men went in and took all the furniture out. And then afterwards, and all these witnesses are watching it, one of the emergency men goes up on the roof and he unstuffs the chimney, unstuffs it, because it was stuffed before when the evicting party came upon a house where smoke was coming up through the chimney. They knew that the family was preparing to give them a hot welcome, literally. They were heating up hot water and porridge and a slurry to shoot out through the doors and windows at the emergency men. But after they were evicted, if they had stuffed this, and it appears they had, then they would unstuff it, because now this house belongs to the sheriff and he's going to put in caretakers. And so the chimney has got to be made usable again. The other thing about this image is, imagine that you are the family defending your home. You're inside a home. It's dark because the windows are blocked. The door is blocked. It's smoky because you got a turf fire going. The ram smashes through your door. The RIC rush in and they drag you outside. As they drag you outside into the sunlight, you come face to face with 30 or 40 people gawking at you. It's, insult to injury. It's terribly humiliating. And here all these people are. And that was a recurring experience. Day 4. This is a photograph of a photograph. And as such, we have lost the notations that may have run across the bottom. This photograph comes from a collection of O'Connor photographs in Sheffield, England. And so I can only assume it's an O'Connor photograph because all the other photographs in that collection were O'Connor photographs. I know that I'm thinking that this is Pat Higgins's eviction because the description from the reporters talks about the house and the action. It was a slate-roofed home. It had 3 chimneys. The ram bursted the door and then stopped, and the eviction was over. That's what we see here. Now, this chimney is not all the way against the end of the roof as it is in the Clary eviction, as it was in the photographs of the Clary eviction. Some people have identified this photograph and said it's of the Clary eviction. I believe it is not. First off, the chimney is not placed right. And then here, only the door was broken through. This is just collateral damage on the side of the door. In the Clary case, the home was destroyed. Here they stopped, which was the case for Pat Higgins. And it stopped because you see the wooden support, we call these sawhorses in the U.S. the ram is resting on its support, and the emergency men are inside taking out family possessions. So the eviction is done and the ram has stopped. The arrow points to 3 women in the background. I don't know who they are. They could be my great-grandmother and her sister and another woman. I just no way of knowing, but it's a curiosity. Here is Captain Peary, the 3rd Hussars captain, a very short man with his bear hat. The British NCOs ran the day-to-day business. And so the NCOs are out with their troops, keeping them in place, keeping the public, at a distance, and establishing this perimeter around the house. The officers were free to wander about, and they do. Here is that 2nd lieutenant who was all the way in the back row on the steps of the Kilrush house, 1 year out of West Point. He looks like a sad sack. That's what we said in my army. He's leaning against the gate here. He's slouching. He looks up and he sees the cameraman has just snapped his photograph and is about ready to take a second photograph. Not wishing to be caught looking so slovenly a second time, he stands away from the fence. He puts his right leg in front. He crosses his hands in front of him. Now, I recognize that position from the American Army in the Victorian era as parade rest. And I believe that's what we're saying. I believe that he has assumed the position of parade rest to look more military because the cameraman has taken his photograph again. These men are correspondents. We see the newspapers, pads of paper in their hand. They're always going to be taking notes. Now, this we also know to be definitively an O'Connor photograph. All the hallmarks are down here. House of Michael Higgins. This is a Sean Sexton photograph. Sean Sexton has at least 8 of these, but it's in his collection, they're better resolution. But I didn't want to go through the effort of, trying to deal with that. It's too complicated. 383 is the number. Typical eviction. And it says down here, House of Michael Higgins, ram after bursting door. Moderate resistance. There we see the brush on either side, but there's no brush in the doorway. They barred the door. So the ram was put to use. Here is the sub-sheriff, very tall man, black socks. Here is the surgeon. Now he's in uniform. Here's Captain Peary with his bear skin hat. RIC gathered around. This is one of several photographs of the McGraw family eviction. Now, it was Matt and Pat. Matthias was the father, Pat was the son. Often in press reports, they got those Matt and Pat confused. Matt and Bridget, the father and the mother, stood outside, and Pat, the son, and his siblings were inside. The children defended the home. They rigorously defended the home. There was a knockdown, drag-out fight. And what happened was, when they made this breach, and this rubble collects right here, 2 DIs, district inspectors, DI Dunning and DI Hill, will, with batons drawn, will rush up over this and inside the house. Coming on the downside, one of the DIs, it was either Dunning Hill, falls on his face right at the feet of Pat McGrath. Pat McGrath is standing there with his fists up, and he takes on the 2 DIs and about 8 other baton swinging constables. Of course, he will eventually succumb. He's dragged out of the house bleeding. That probably has already happened. And so the photographer asked to take this photograph, and the Ram crew and the sub-sheriff and the senior RIC, Lopdale, agreed. They accommodated him. So this was the most sensational of all of the evictions. There should be a lot more photographs than there are. Now, this particular one, old and worn as you see it, it's a photograph that's peeling from a scrapbook. This was again found in a collection of O'Connor photographs in Sheffield, England, but it also is found in the National Library of Ireland, Lawrence collection, and it bears the number 1780. And it's odd because it's such an imperfect photograph. unlike the majority of Lauren's collection of photographs. Again, in finding it in another O'Connor collection makes me suspect that it was an acquisition purchased by Lawrence. Eviction scene. Again, this is a William Lawrence photographs, and they use generic, the back office applied very generic titles, eviction scene. I like this photograph because of the detail it gives us. The Flanagan house was not meant to be evicted. John Flanagan is the tenant holder. He's right here in the window. He's an old man. He's not even looking outside. He's looking inside his house. The family had not prepared for the eviction. When they look out their window and they see the evicting party coming up the road, they hastily move all of their possessions outside, and they put them on the back side of the house to keep them away from any possible use any possible, they want to keep it away from the ram in case the ram does get used on their home. John Connell sits in the window. He places his daughter right there in the doorway, and she stands her ground. The sheriff comes up, demands possession. He is in this picture right there, hard to see. The constables come up, one of the officers from the regular infantry, and she says, he demands possession. He tells her to vacate the house, and she says, "You've got the wrong house." And he looks at his list and he says, "You're on my list." And she says, "I shouldn't be. We are outside of the Kilrush district. You've got the wrong, you can't evict us." There's a standoff because now there's reasonable doubt. You don't see a ram in this picture. Colonel Turner walks away and he has a discussion with this man. I'm trying to find out if this is the lawyer representing the landlord. They may be talking about the finer points of law if they proceed with this eviction, which they will do. The family just decides it's better just to get out of their house and preserve their house and not have it be damaged by the ram. So they will eventually leave. But before we go on to the next photograph, which will show the evicted family, I like to, being a former soldier, a line officer, I like to look at these guys and comment on their uniforms. This is Tommy Atkins. That's the historical name for the line infantry soldier. Look at the way he's dressed for a day in the field. He's got a haversack carrying his rations. Here's a pipe smoker. He's got his tobacco or pipe in there. Here's his blanket roll in case he's kept out overnight. Here is his canteen. He's got 2 ammunition pouches on the front. And look at the length of these bayonets. Now, why would these fellas be fixing their bayonets? Colonel Turner defended the command to fix bayonets. He said for crowd control. He said there were days when he felt that the evicting party was being threatened by the spectators of the local population, and he needed fixed bayonets to keep them at bay. That is the infantry soldier. Here is the RIC. The difference, of course, is black belts and white belts. These men are wearing bottle green uniforms. They're not blue. They're bottle green uniforms. And they've got black webbing. Here are those sheathed batons that were drawn out for the Cleary family eviction. Everybody's at ease here. There is no threat of violence. There's not going to be any use of the ram. And it was because it was likely a mistaken eviction. Here's the family after they were evicted. One kind of photograph down below, Father Gilligan and the evicted family, Flanagan family, Vandeleur Estate, and a phone and a number, 385. This is a great photograph. Here we see all these haycocks in the distance, some of them very nicely formed. And here is one of those haycocks. O'Connor, and we know this to be an O'Connor photograph, asked the family, and he always asked the family. He was very polite. The newspapers don't say Mr. O'Connor asked the family. They say the photographer very politely asked the family to pose for photographs. Here they are right here. Here is Mr. Flanagan, John Flanagan, Mrs. Flanagan. There's the daughter who stood in the doorway, sons, and this possibly is a son. I was told by a family descendant that these are not Flanagan family members. They're just people that wanted to get into the scene. And here's a young girl peeking around the haycock over here. The story that was contained in this photograph was, about the eviction, that the family was wrongly evicted, but they chose discretion, thinking it the better part of valor, and stepped out. They were being consoled by Father Lawrence Gilligan. And in the report, there is a lengthy report of this photograph here by a correspondent who was standing right there. He says that Father Gilligan had just been released from 30 days of jail time for preaching, advocating the plan and campaign down at La Bashida. It was illegal to advocate for the plan and campaign, so he got in the rowboat and had two people roll him out into the Shannon. He stood up and he gave his pitch to the people standing on the shore. As soon as he got back on shore, he was arrested and thrown into jail for 30 days. He's released just in time to be available for these evictions. Now, he had just been consoling the family, the Flanagan family. The photographer asks him to step into the picture, and he places in between Mr. and Mrs. Flanagan. The correspondent's watching all this, and this is what he finds so amusing. Father Gilligan's uncomfortable. He leans against a haycock. He places his left foot over his right. He plants his elbow into the haycock, and he gets this contemplative look. And the correspondent, to excuse the expression, he made hay with that. He says, here's a man who's just been released from 30 days of imprisonment where he was on starvation rations for advocating for the plan and campaign. And now here he is, and you might think he was contemplating the higher things like getting his parishioners to heaven, and instead he's consoling them after being evicted from their home. It's all written down very nicely in the correspondence report. Now, my great-grandfather brought home 4 photographs that were published in the Gale. 2 of them were the Clary family eviction, and 2 were taken on day 8. Here's the first of those 2. Now, I'm going to flip real quick between 2 photographs. This was the first photograph. This was my great-grandfather's photograph. It's an O'Connor photograph, and it's called Demanding Possession. The sheriff has come up to the house, which has got brush in the windows and the doorway, and he said, Mr. Connell, vacate your house. It's on my eviction list. Connell ignores him. The sheriff says again, Mr. Connell, quit your home. You're on this list. Connell ignores him. The sheriff says, okay, I'm bringing up the ram. If you don't come out, I'm going to break down your wall. The ram is brought up, and we see it right here. Colonel Turner steps in, pushes everybody out of the way, and says, let me have a shot at this. And he puts his head into this. This is not a doorway. This is a window. He puts his head into that brush there, and he whispers to Connell. The reporters back here see him doing it. They don't know what he said. Then he stands back and say, well, what do you say, Mr. Connell? And Mr. Connell yells out from inside of this window, I've never been arrested before. I don't intend to be arrested today. I will not resist. At which point, one of the constables direct the emergency men to take a pitchfork and remove the brush. They send in a district inspector, and they lead Connell out. That's what this scene is about. Everybody's clustered around the window. They're having a conversation with Connell on the other side. The reporters in the distance and the ram. Now, look at these 2 photographs. It's the same scene. There's an umbrella peeking in on the right. There's the umbrella peeking in on the right. This is the subsequent photograph, and you know that because of the differences. The ram had been partially unpacked from the cart, but not used. The brush has been taken out of the window and the doors. People have come out of the house. There's the sheriff, and he's probably watching the emergency men take out the possessions, which you see starting to accumulate in the front yard. Mr. Connell has already been escorted out of the house, and the emergency men are inside clearing the house. The umbrella means that a woman was present. We don't know who the woman was, but this is an O'Connor photograph, and this is a Lawrence photograph. And this is one of the photographs that early on got me to believing that William Lawrence purchased photographs from O'Connor. They're too similar. It's the same photographer. It's the same event. It's the same location, minutes apart. And I call this a sibling photo. These two photographs, sibling photographs. They were begotten by the same photographer, one after the other. And it's an indication to me, circumstantial, that Lawrence purchased a number of O'Connor photographs. Day 8, last day of the evictions. The most photographed eviction was this one right here, Thomas Birmingham. The eviction started on the front side. This is the back side you're looking at. The eviction started on the front side where the front door was, but the family resisted, the wife, the father, and the children, and they shot out lots of hot water. And so the eviction party went around to the other side where there were 4 windows. You see them right here. And they decided to go at this side of the house. This is a William Lawrence photograph, and it's correctly titled Ready for Hot Water. The back office staff knew enough about the evictions to know that this family shot water out through the windows and the doors. But it also is described battering ram. There is no battering ram. There are the support poles. The battering ram is not in place. There is the front support piece. The battering ram is off to the right out of the picture. The emergency men have just assembled the support bar, the support poles. This man is holding the swing chain. This may be an imperfection, or it may be, the fumes or the smoke from hot water. But clearly the emergency man up close to the windows got his wicker shield up to protect himself from being hit with hot water. This is the sub-sheriff. He's holding his eviction list in his hand, blackthorn stick, black leggings, black stockings. He's got a wicker shield himself. So they are in the process of assembling the ram. It is not there. Look at all these people here. Here is the medical officer, one of the officers, one of the RMs, newspaper correspondents, and then there's a mystery man in the top hat. He only appears on day 8. I've been trying to identify him. He may be the Vicar General, Michael Dinnan. Help me out, Patty. He may be the Vicar General.
Dinan.
He may be Vicar General Dinan. I don't know. I thought he might be one of the solicitors, but I've ruled him out. I thought he might have been one of the politicians, but I've ruled them out too, because I know what those guys look like. 2 people down here are spectators in blogging sites. People have thought they were my ancestors. They are not. My great-grandfather was a very youthful looking 40-year-old at the time when he witnessed these evictions. This is an older gentleman and an older woman. She came dressed for the evictions. One of the reporters called these people excursionists. She's got her binoculars in a case hung in front of her. Now, there is also an emergency man's coat sitting up on the top, held in place of a rock because it's hot work running the ram. Here is one of the photographs my great-grandfather brought home. Same couple. There's that emergency man's coat. Now this one, we do see a ram, and this one is titled by O'Connor. It is an O'Connor photograph. Eviction on Vandeleur Estate, Tom Birmingham's house, ram at work. Now this ram is truly at work. It is not yet breached the wall. The emergency men are in motion. They're blurred. The captain's got his arm up in command, back away with them. It's the same people in the background, including the man in the top hat. The lady is now looking directly at the cameraman. The ram is about ready to impact the wall. O'Connor 389. Lawrence photograph. And again, if you look at all of these photographs, they're all taken from the same place. And so I say again that my great-grandfather's photograph, this one, is a sibling to these other photographs taken by the same photographer at the same vantage point, just minutes apart. Now this Lawrence photograph says back away with them, but in fact they're not swinging anymore. They have stopped. They're waiting for direction. They're looking at somebody off here. Now there's Captain Croker right there, and probably the Cecil Roach and Colonel Turner are somewhere in the picture and are having a discussion. They've broken through. They've breached the wall where there had been a window. There were 4 windows. You can see the brush. They've made a breach and they're waiting for direction. Now this family was resisting and they're still inside. So what will happen is they will widen the breach, and the ram has done that. The ram has done its work. And emergency men can be seen inside. The family has already been evicted, and they're now throwing out the family's possessions. So the sheriff has taken custody of this house. There is the senior RIC Lopdale. There is Cecil Roach. Here's Colonel Turner. Here's another RM. Reporters are in the background. There's the man in the top hat behind the infantry officer. Now, if you just had the Lawrence photographs as your sole guide to the actions that happened, you would read this caption, "The ram has done its work," and you'd think they're done. They're going to pack this ram up and take it away. The house has been, this is all the damage they're going to do to this house. Until you find an O'Connor photograph, which tells you otherwise. Not only did they bang down this wall, then they moved the ram and they widened it, and then they moved the support poles farther down the house, and they did another breach. This is the 4th family that resisted arrest, and therefore the 4th home that was rendered uninhabitable. Now the ram is being removed and put to the cart. Here's the horse. The cart's just outside the photograph on the right. Take a look at the length of the ram. I like this photograph because now you get a real feeling of the size of the battering ram. It takes 10 men, 10 emergency men to carry this ram, and they are struggling. There's Colonel Turner. I'm sorry, this is Captain Crocker, and then just various people. Here is the London Times reporter, Mr. McDonald. I have read that in other reports. That concludes the photographs of the, that were taken during the evictions. Now, right behind this slide are more, but that concludes the 34 photographs. I haven't shown you all of them because I've only been interested in the O'Connor photographs and a few Lawrence photographs for comparison. So where my study has taken me to date is I have verified my great-grandfather's statement that O'Connor was present and he was a photographer of substance. Yet, and I find this interesting, he is never mentioned in the scholarly literature, in the published literature. Nobody mentions Timothy O'Connor, the Limerick photographer. And it's easy to find the evidence when you go looking for O'Connor. And I think that's the difference. I went looking for O'Connor, whereas most scholars go looking at the photographs, and they start with the Lawrence collection because it's so well known. But if you do that, you're only looking at half of the inventory and you're missing much of the story. And I think it's just the gravitational pull of the Lawrence collection, the fame of the Lawrence collection, the Lawrence brand that pulled people away from discovering O'Connor, who's easy to discover. O'Connor took more than 40 photographs. He took photographs before the evictions, as we learned from the court correspondent on the 17th of July. I've not found them, but certainly he took a handful. He took some 34 during the evictions, or there were 44. I will say there's 34 photographs taken, and O'Connor took a lot of them. And there were photographs taken after the evictions, which will come after this slide if you want to stick around. O'Connor took a lot of photographs. The evidence suggests, by reading the various reports and looking at the graphic, that O'Connor meant his photographs to aid and abet the requirement for publicity, the plan of campaigns requirement for publicity, and to engender public sympathy. Even more so when observers come after the evictions and they come around to those 4 damaged homes, O'Connor's photographs are circulated to them. That's the rest of the story. So O'Connor's photographs were being used, whether O'Connor intended it up front or whether it was just an opportunistic thing, but O'Connor's photographs were used to aid and abet the publicity of the plan of campaign. There is some overlap between O'Connor's photographs and Lawrence collection. There's at least 3 that look like they should have been O'Connor photographs. And so I think that there was an acquisition made after the fact, after the evictions. Certainly by the 4th or 5th of August, Lawrence was aware of O'Connor's photographs because of the Irish exhibition. He may have approached O'Connor at that time. There was a second photographer present on day 8, the reporters say. I suspect he may have been there also on the 7th, and it might have been Peter Collins, who had a studio in Kilkee. There is much more to be learned. This is not the final word on these evictions. I believe there's more photographs to be found, and I know that, or I suspect that, because I keep hearing stories coming out of Clare where Clare people say, oh, when I was growing up, a photograph was hanging on the wall in this house, or I rented a room and the landlady had a photograph hanging up. I keep hearing these things. I've not been able to nail them down, but I believe that more photographs are still out there. So going towards the future, it would be great if we could consolidate or centralize all of this effort, that we could collect the photographs, getting permission from owners or where they're archived, make good copies, place them in one place, preserve the ones that are getting showing their age, and of course display them and make them open to the public. That's the end of the first half of this. I'm just going to show you one more photograph because Patty brought it up at the beginning. My great-grandfather. The family story has it that one of the photographs that my great-grandfather brought back was so important to him that he had it enlarged, framed, and hung in a prominent place in his house. Now, this was a big event for him coming back to New York City, and he circulated the O'Connor photographs. In his circles of Irish nationalists, he made what he had seen well known. And if he had a photograph that was important enough to blow up, the family suspects he was in it. And I've been looking. Here are 2 photographs of my great-grandfather, closest to 1888. Here is a man in that photograph of the Spellisy family eviction. This is a Sean Sexton photograph. I took it out of a book of his, and it's clearer than the copy I used in the presentation. I look at this man's face. I look at his hair. I look at his features, and I say, looks sort of like that guy. And my great-grandfather was a youthful 40 when he was at the evictions. It could be him. He's got this outrageous pose. He's got a fancy cane. He was a wealthy merchant at the time that he was a New York merchant at the time he made his tour through Europe. Okay, Patty, I can unshare. I can stop sharing this now, and we can take questions. Then I'll have to get back for those who want to see the rest of the slides.
Thank you very much, Ed, for that remarkable tour de force. I certainly learned a lot from it. I'm sure everyone else did. I suppose I'll start by looking at the comments on the chat page before we ask if anyone else wants to ask anything. Susan Bowman said it would be interesting if the Irish Photographic Archive could help with gathering the remaining photos from all over, or suggest the Harry Ransom Center in Austin, Texas, an extensive photo department. I presume you've been in contact with the National Library's Photographic Archive about what they have.
Oh, I have continuously, and I certainly had some conversation with Elizabeth Currid when she was still, I think she may be retired now, but when she was running the photographic archives, I've contributed, my thoughts in writing, and including a cataloging of all of those Lawrence. I'm talking about the Lawrence photographs exclusively when I say this, of the Lawrence photographs, offering different comments to the ones that were posted. But the thing is possession. Sean Sexton's got a bunch. There's a bunch in the library in Sheffield. They're all over the place, and so you've got to deal with ownership rights.
And if anyone listening out there has a photograph hanging at home or whatever that you haven't seen tonight, let us know about it. Paul has put up a picture of the tourist office on O'Connell Street in Limerick, which is the present occupier of where O'Connor's studio was. George Street, as everyone knows, became O'Connell Street subsequently. Stephanie Rowan said, thank you very much. Michael O'Connell said, brilliant. Kim O'Shea says that PBS program like History Detectives would be a perfect partner to further illuminate your stellar work, Ed. Premise of the show is to start with some person's research, artifacts, etc., and address the pressing queries of the person featured. They search far and wide. Their efforts and research would greatly help and make for riveting television. Certainly would. I'm certain they would be interested. Their great grandfather, the photo, the O'Connor photos, and the evictions in Ireland. You talk to them?
You were on a roll there, Patty. I couldn't capture all of that.
I read too fast. The PBS History Detective series might be interested in the story.
Yeah, I have not talked to them. I thought it would be important first, when this opportunity came up. I thought it would be good to get this thing out because I have to say, I've lived in some fear, having published 4 articles in the Other Claire, that somebody would come back at me, and take real offense at what I said because, I've challenged some of the conventional thinking. So I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop before I, went so bold as to contact, something like PBS or what have you.
Anyway, I think we would encourage you to do that. Morgan Rowan said, thank you, very interesting. Kerry Slattery asked, how were these 46 people particularly targeted?
So there is an interesting, again, reading the contemporary recounts, there were 46 people that were, understand that this agricultural depression, had caused the tenants to be in arrears many, many years. And so the land agent had identified those who hadn't paid their rents. And then there were issues of, where they were on this very large Vandeleur estate because of the legal jurisdictions. So the Kilrush district, there was 46. Now, 25 were selected. Now, the contemporary reports say that the 25 were selected because they were better able to withstand the outright eviction than the others than the remainder of the 46. They had the more substantial households. They were aware of their financial status, so they thought they were better able to survive. But that's not exactly true because in 2 cases they went after widows, the O'Day widows, and one of those cases there was a child being cared for by grandparents who was I'm not sure what the politically correct term is today, but she was handicapped, and they were really unable to withstand eviction. So in all cases, saying that they were all able to, with the 25 were able to withstand evictions, not accurate. But anyway, there was all kind of legal machinations going on.
Owen Shanahan says, a fabulous and worthwhile piece of research and a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much. Joan, I'm not sure, is that Joan Davis says we don't, yes, it is. Joan Davis says we don't have any photographs, but if I'm correct, 3 descendants of Patrick McInerney were present for this lecture. Certainly 3 descendants of his brother, I think, were present for the lecture. Thank you very much, Ed. Emily Mark Fitzgerald says, thanks, that's very interesting. Have you found any O'Connor negatives? So all you have are photographs, clearly prints from original negatives. What's in the Lawrence collection are negatives.
So the answer to that is no. I'm aware that the Lawrence collection has glass plate negatives. The O'Connor photographs that I have found are all paper, and they show their age. Now, let me just say that 10 years ago, and some of the people attending will remember this. 10 years ago, a box of O'Connor photographs were found after a house clearing in Limerick, and that they were destined for the bin until somebody recognized them for what they were. Then they were sent to a Galway auction house, and they were, a lot that was put up for auction. They were purchased. But the person that purchased them requested anonymity, and all the auction house would tell, some members of this audience were part of that, not I, was that it was an Irish author who purchased them. Now, my guess is it was Sean Sexton, because some years later, Sean starts to, release some of his O'Connor photographs for publication purposes, and he puts them up for sale on various websites, and you can find them today. He doesn't know. I don't think he knows, because if you look at that photograph published in the book that has my great grandfather, at the bottom of the caption it says it says unknown photographer. Well, I know who it is. It's O'Connor. So I don't think he's fully aware of what he has. But no, I have found no glass negatives, just paper print copies of photographs.
Let's hope they show up eventually.
I mean, it's possible that Sean Sexton has glass negatives, but I've not found any.
Christy Killeen wants to know, are you any relation to the Shaughnessy's of Shaughnessy's Cross, about 2 miles south of Kilmihill on the Mail Line Road from Ennis to Kilrush? It says, great lecture.
Don't know.
Don't know. Did you say your Shaughnessy or your Finucane ancestors were from Coolmeen?
So we don't know the story going that far back. We know that when they left Clare, we think by way of Limerick to come to Montreal, that they were living in Coolmeen. And I say that because the tombstone of one of the brothers, one of the sons of this family, had on his tombstone in Montreal that he was from Coolmeen. His older brother, it was a younger brother, older brother just said native of Clare. Most people just said native of Clare, but this one brother says Coolmeen. He puts it right there on his tombstone.
I'm not too far from Shaughnessy's Cross, but someday we may trace the connection. Kathleen Hawke, who's a descendant of the McInerney, says, I grew up, I presume it's the same Kathleen, is it? I grew up on a farm a mile outside Kilkee. It is, of course. I heard about those evictions many times, never heard that any of my family were evicted, although my grandmother in Munmore was a McInerney. I believe the Vandeleur mansion was burned by the IRA around 1919 or 1920. That's not correct. It was burned in the 1890s, I think. And
I thought it was part of the burning of a lot of mansions by the IRA at the end of the War of Independence, but that might not be true.
There were a lot of them burned, but the Vandeleur one was burned
1897.
decades before that, 1897.
Burned in 1897, accidentally burned 30,000 pounds worth of damage.
Oh, okay. Well, I knew it had been burned. There's nothing there right now with the grounds. There's a little restaurant you can go in the gardens and have snacks. It's very pretty, but the house was never rebuilt.
Yeah. Emily Mark Fitzgerald is back again to ask, how do you know how the O'Connor photographs ended up in Sheffield?
They ended up what?
How the O'Connor photographs ended up in Sheffield, in the Sheffield archive.
Oh yeah, so that's the second story that would come after the concluding remarks. I'll just say that in mid-August, one of the Liberal members of Parliament from Sheffield, representing Sheffield, Henry J. Wilson, who was very sympathetic to the Planet campaign, arrived. He was escorted around by, I would call him an agent of the National League, and he was handed a bunch of O'Connor photographs. And this is the rest of the story, which, people that want to hang around can see. And his photographs were circulated to the visitors. And so they're not just in England, they could be on the continent, because some of the visitors came from, one in particular, a famous one, came from Germany. So O'Connor's photographs were handed off to those, wanting to take something home to help in their memory of what they were told.
If anyone listening is in any photographic archive and spots anything like that, let us know. Emma also says, somebody's put in a new comment now and I've lost the last one, that Sean Sexton has a history of publishing photographs with different dates and attributions. So not always correct. Sharon Roach says, just joined Zoom for this and it was fascinating. Andrew Cope reminds us about the great song about the fight put up during the McGrath eviction. For anyone interested, there's a link there in the chat. McGrath from My Asti Shore is the name of the song. Morgan Rowan says he thinks the altar in the church in Kilrush is dedicated to Father Dine, and I think that's correct. It was rumoured that he rang the bell to alert people to evictions.
Yeah, he denied that. He denied that, of course, but yes.
Father Dinan also studied in the Irish College in Paris. I found his record there when I was out there a couple of years ago.
So anybody else want to chip in with any questions? Just unmute yourself and holler if you want to ask anything. Otherwise, there's a few more pictures that he'd show anyone who wants to hang around of the aftermath of the evictions.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm just wondering where in the Kilrush area these houses were. I see they came up Francis Street, so were they out towards Kappa, or where were
They
these?
were in all directions from the town. My Asta was where the McGraths and the Birminghams were, Connellsburg, Cluny, Lissan, Spellacy was out the Kilrush Road. There's a wonderful little book published for the centenary in 1988 by Noel J. Mulqueen on the Vandeleur Evictions, and he has maps and details. And I have started to put together a map trying to show the locations, but I need to go to the valuation office in Dublin to check exactly, because many townlands there were two families with the same name. And, that office has been closed for most of the last 2 years, but I'll get back there eventually and try and put together the map. But the Vandeleur Estate was something like, was it 20,000 acres in all directions around Kilrush town. They were, I think, selected a geographical area. They do the Tullycrine ones one day and the Cluny Lissan ones another day, Carradosha, Myasta another day, and so on. But it might help Ed, in future, if you wanted to add the townland names after the names of the families, that to help the locals to place who we're talking about.
Yeah, it will be pushing my luck to even pronounce those things for sure.
Yeah. And Donaldson has their hand up. Who wants to ask a question?
I was just saying, my father's people were Clearys in Carradosha. My paternal grandmother was Maria Cleary, who married Thomas Donald, who had his place in Crotties in the Square. So I know they were in the Land League. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Was it around 1888? 1 year they won the prize for tillage, some medal for tillage. Then they were in the Land League and they got evicted. And the ladies used boiling porridge to defend themselves from the Vandeleur agents, but two of them ended up marrying policemen afterwards. Now, so that's as much as I know. I don't know how they reclaimed their land, their property afterwards.
Can I address that?
Sure, Ed. Yeah.
Sorry.
So
I'll
give you a answer that may not satisfy you entirely, but a year later or so, the landlord, Captain Hector S. Vandeleur, was forced into arbitration. There was so much bad publicity coming from these evictions. The photographs went all over the place. They were debated in the House of Commons, what have you. So much bad publicity that he was forced into arbitration. And the tenants, all the tenants who wanted to get their homes back, pretty much got them back. And then when these laws came out at the beginning of the 20th century to purchase these lands, the tenants were offered the opportunity to purchase them from the Vandeleur Estate. So a lot of them ended up with their homes back.
Thank you so much. I came to this late, so this kind of helps to complete the jigsaw, if you like. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Emily is back with another question. Thanks. That's very interesting. No, it's the same question has been submitted twice. Sorry, I've just been bunged up. No, there's no more questions in the chat, I think. Anybody else want to ask anything? Those who want to stay around, Ed, do you want to show us the last few pictures?
Sure. Let me see if I can do this right. Share. Okay, can you see it?
You have started. Yeah, we're back to your first slide.
I know. I'm going to. Why can't I do this? Okay. It's frozen on me. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
The Clary family house?
Yeah, now it's up.
Yeah, we can see that.
All right, let me just move this. I have to move this
Okay,
this
I'll
gallery.
mute people again. I may have to unmute you, Ed. I will unmute yourself, Ed.
Mute. Okay.
Okay, you're back.
Okay, so I'm going to run by some photographs showing the aftermath. This is another O'Connor photograph. Same language that we had before. Cleary's house. After battering ram, eviction on Vandeleur Estate. Now, the Cleary's house was one of those that that people loved. They were like pilgrimage sites. The people that missed the evictions from England and the continent, but wanted to see them, were they'd come into Dublin and they'd be met by members of the National League who would bring them to Kilrush, and then they would escort them around. So one of the ones they liked to see was this one. And so there is the Cleary family. Remember, 3 chimneys, slated roof, thoroughly destroyed. Here's that wall that you saw early on. And there's a, jaunting car here, and someone has been brought to see this house. There's rain on the ground. We don't know how to date this thing, but it's after the fact. Now, back to Emily's question, this is the same scene, but this is from an amateur photographer. He's using one of those Kodaks that had just come out. And there we have his notes, Michael. And there's the house. There's the location of the house, Patty. Michael Cleary's house. He was evicted 18 July. Cecil Roach, RM, opened a court of justice, and Cleary's children were brought before him and charged with defending their home, while he sat on this rock wall and was both judge and jury. So now we've got this man, this MP from Sheffield, England, named Wilson, who's being brought around. Now here's another picture of the Cleary house from a different angle. He's taking it from the other end. And again, Michael Cleary's house, he was evicted 8 July. The figure beyond the house is, and it's very hard to see, it's a bad illustration, is Mr. O'Mara. Now, who is Mr. O'Mara? Here's Mr. O'Mara. It's Michael O'Mara from Kilrush. Michael O'Mara served as an escort. Now, again, I don't know the details, but he certainly escorted Mr. Wilson around. And it says right here, Mr. Wilson MP has forwarded me a check for £10, which is a lot of, in those days, was a lot of money for the evicted tenantry. An indemnity fund has been set up, because they had to build temporary lodging for these people. They had to move them in and care for them after the evictions. And he just wanted this guy O'Mara, who's writing from Kilrush on the 6th of September, just wanted the press, the sympathetic press, to know that people were coming by and, in this case, making a donation. So it's hard to see. I've magnified this, and the man appears to have a black beard. That's about all I can say about this guy. This is the only photograph of the Simon Connell home. There were 4 homes destroyed. Cleary's, McGrath, Simon Connell, and Tom Birmingham. This is the only one we have. It's taken by the visiting MP, Mr. Wilson. And there he gives us the details. Simon Connell's house. He was evicted after a desperate struggle. Mr. Connell and family, Mrs. Connell. Now there's a man here, but it says Mrs. Connell and family are included. And then he talks about visiting Simon Connell, in the hospital. So this is a very caring man. Not only does he come around and take a look at the destroyed homes, he's speaking with the tenants, and he's visiting those in the hospital. I meant to get this. This was misplaced, but I'll just say that while the visitors, the excursionists, are being escorted around the evicted homes in mid-August, William Lawrence, this is when we first discovered that William Lawrence is marketing his photographs. And under B for battering ram, under V for Vandeleur Estate evictions, on the 11th and the 14th, he's already selling 18 photographs. And he's marketing them, if it bleeds, it reads. There's an American expression about, publicizing the most violent events, most graphic, instantaneous photographs, most graphic. and interesting. He's selling them for 1 shilling 16 pence each. This thing here talks about, you know, that Mr. Lawrence has published an eviction, you know, a series of eviction photographs, and down below it says, "Oh, by the way, Mr. Collins of Kilkee and Mr. O'Connor of Limerick have also succeeded in producing." The language is different. So the difference was certainly as a businessman, Lawrence mass marketed his photographs. He's selling them, you know, he's got 18 for sale early in August. They travel through distribution circles to England and the continent, and other people use them for other reasons. But O'Connor's photographs appeared to be not mass produced, put on these Carta Vista backings. My great grandfather had those. Mr. Wilson got some of those. So they were still marketed, but I found no publications in the newspaper. Continuing on with these evicted homes. Here's the McGrath family. This was the most important eviction to the press accounting, because Pat McGrath, the son of Pat McGraw, the son of Matt McGraw, defended himself and the house. He was photographed by a photographer who very politely asked to RIC to stand still with Pat McGrath in handcuffs, and they took a photograph of him. And they took a photograph of him with his head bandaged. That photograph is well described in the press. We haven't found it. Shortly thereafter, he breaks his cuffs. That was not photographed, but there was a man from Dublin, from United Ireland, on hand to do this representation. Now look at this man. Look at his jaw. Look at that man's jaw. Look at his legs. Look at this man's legs. I think that we are looking at Pat McGraw in this photograph. And this is my only link between, you know, but I think this is Pat McGraw. Now, if that is Pat McGraw, who was sentenced to 60 days hard labor for resisting arrest and defending his home, if he served the full 60 days, he wouldn't be out until around the end of September, you know, July to August, August to September. That would date this photograph to 2 months post-eviction. So I put it to the audience. Did William Lawrence send dispatch a photographer back to Kilrush to take this photograph with Pat McGraw inside? This is a William Lawrence photograph. Or did he purchase this photograph? Now, the other thing that's interesting is this number. This number is far out of sequence of the 1760 to 1780 that Lawrence supplied to all of the other eviction photographs. So I think this was a acquisition that happened, you know, possibly months later. It is the only William Lawrence photo that shows a home post eviction. So there's an interesting story here that we don't know the answer to. But I want you to look at this lady right here. Look at these young men. Look at this upright board here. Here is a O'Connor photograph. You know, eviction, Vandeleur Estate. He talks about the McGraw family after eviction. Here is that woman. This board now has been smashed. It's the same home. Here's a man standing by a jaunting car. Somebody besides the cameraman might be in this photograph. Look at this is Matt. This is not the son. This is the father. Matt and his wife Bridget were standing outside when their home was destroyed. 2 weeks later, Bridget dies of pneumonia. The family alleged that she died because of watching the brutality of her own family's eviction and watching her son come out of the house beat up and bloodied. It was dismissed in a court. They refused to hear it. But this man is now a widower. That's his daughter when this picture was taken. Now, interestingly, on the 28th of October, German royals come to that very house. German royals from the continent are visiting England, and they stop over in Ireland. The the Crown Duke of Saxony and his parents come to visit, and they come to visit during their short stay at Kilkee last week. They come to visit the scene of the Vandeleur evictions. They are especially interested in Pat McGraw. It's really Matt's house, but Pat McGraw's battered house, and they sympathize with old McGraw regarding the demise of his wife, Bridget. The Duke and the Duchess, upon leaving, make presents to the McGraw family, and they compliment the son, Pat, for his bravery. Now, if they are coming in on this is the 28th of September, Pat's now out of jail. So that ties us back, to this photograph, at least in time. So that's interesting. Now, here's another photograph. Look at Matt's hands. Look at Matt's hands. But this time we have children in the picture. We got the same woman with shawl. That's the daughter. Pat and one of his sisters defended this house. That's probably the sister who defended their home. So there are many photographs of this. It's the most notorious of the evictions. These are just general photographs. This was published in one of my articles, showing that this is Croker's cart that carried the ram. And this is that man in the top hat. There's that couple. I don't know who they are. These are the officers hanging around. Day 8 eviction. O'Connor backside of one of those carte de vistas showing an eviction that I used in the illustration. Peter Collins, possibly Timothy O'Connor, but it's certainly a Irish photographer. And this is interesting because according to Noel McQueen, that the Cleary home was rebuilt and in 1980 was still around. It doesn't appear to be today. There must be a story there. There is the Cleary family. This is can we see the bottom of can you see the bottom notes there? I can't see it on mine. Patty, can you see them?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so that's the Cleary family in one of these temporary homes built by the National League from the Indemnity Fund. It's on a neighbor's estate, a neighbor adjoining the Captain Vandeleur's estate. So, I assume that must be Pat, Mrs. Cleary. There were 2 daughters and 2 sons who defended the house. They're probably in the picture, maybe here and here. There was a song also sung, put to music, about the Cleary family eviction. There it is, or a poem. They called it a song, but it may have been just a poem. So that's all I have, I believe. Yep. So these eviction photographs did a lot of work in terms of publicity for the National League. That's the point I wanted to make. I'm done.